our next debate, which is Ben Loughnane. He's not holding back on his Saturday 5 debut. He thinks it's time to bring back capital punishment. Yes, it's time for Big Ben to chime in.
Well, capital punishment, very contentious issue. We used to have it for a very long time, and we abolished it some years ago now, well, many decades ago, in fact. But should it be time, should it be brought back? Because we've seen a recent spate of horrific crimes where the people are banged to rights. We now have, in fact, more methods than ever to establish guilt to a higher degree than we did previously. We have video evidence, forensic evidence. We have methods of establishing for certain that people are guilty. We've seen in cases like, the recent child Finlay who was murdered. Should people like child killers be given the death penalty if it is beyond complete doubt that they are guilty? We've also seen other cases, not just child killers, people like Wayne Couzens, who was absolutely banged to rights and did something completely horrendous and beyond reproach. Should he have received the death penalty? Interestingly, when you do poll people on the death penalty, they tend to be against it. But when you give it a very specific case, where you say, for example, drummer Lee Rigby's murderers, who stood in front of a camera holding a bloodied knife and saying that they were not sorry for what they did, in fact, they believed it was their moral responsibility to do so. In those cases, people say, well, in fact, maybe in that case, we should have the death penalty. And that's all I'm asking for. In the absolute extreme cases, where there's absolutely no doubt, why can't we have that option in law? I'm sure, Albie, you'll disagree.
I don't know what gave you that impression, but you're absolutely right. I do disagree with you, Benjamin Loughnane, because I often argue that the state does too much, and I don't think it is for the state to decide who lives and who dies. I'm sure we can have a more strenuous criminal justice system with longer sentences, harsher punishments. But I would feel very uncomfortable with the state sanctioning the death of a criminal, even if the crime that they did was heinous.
Well, I'm sympathetic to that. The one caveat to what I'll say is that I don't really trust this government or this state to have that sort of power. But then when you extend that logic, why should they have the power to sentence people to life in prison? Why should they have the power to put people in prison at all? If you say you don't trust the state to have that moral arbitering role, then why would you trust them to put people in prison?
And we do it in wartime, of course.
Yeah, we did it before.
I said I didn't trust the state to decide who lived and who died, not whether or not people can go to prison.
Well, so why do you trust them with that?
I think it's a very different proposition to be saying the state decides based on the evidence that this criminal is guilty and therefore should spend the rest of their life in prison, compared to the state saying the same, but we won't just put you in prison, we'll actually kill you. I just think it's a bit of an overreach of power for me. It's something I would personally feel very uncomfortable with.
But of course, it's not the state, it's always a jury. You have a jury of your peers, so it's not entirely the state, is it?
Listen, I've had my run-ins with the law on issues of free speech. Not anything as hideous as what we're talking about today, because I think it is worth highlighting the incident that you mentioned, because it was a 10-month-old baby murdered on Christmas Day in 2020, and the parents were heard mentioning selling the pram on eBay and laughing in the back of a taxi. Now, for people like that, I have to say, I think it's a waste of taxpayer resources to keep them in prison. I think they are heartless, horrible. I was about to swear there. I won't. But I think that people like that ought to be off.
Is it about punishment or revenge, I guess? I sense that Benjamin is just a bit hungry for blood.
No,
it's
about...
You like a bit of revenge.
If someone's not remorseful and is not sorry for what they've done and are willing to do it again, why should we even entertain the opportunity that they might want to be out free to do it again?
But Benjamin, let's look at the outputs here. So if the output is from prison or punishment, that we want less crime to happen, is there evidence that in countries where there is a death penalty that people are less likely to commit the most heinous crimes?
There's a lot of evidence to suggest that as a deterrent, the death penalty is very effective.
Such as?
Well, if you look historically, the rate
of
crime seems to be abolished.
Murder still happens in countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, and rape still happens there as well.
But you don't believe in the state, right? Well, a big state, anyway.
I don't believe in a big state.
But this is quite interesting. Do you think that, you could have an eye for an eye if it wasn't the state killing someone, death penalty, but the family of the child that was murdered?
Look,
should you be allowed to enact your own?
No.
Back in Anglo-Saxon times, that's how the law worked, right? If somebody killed your family member, you kill one of theirs. Look, I don't think that's practical in the modern day.
I'm not advocating
advocating for that either. But I think fundamentally this is a problem with the UK institutions and our justice system. We don't put people away. We don't put them away for long enough. We see people that are child predators actually end up being released after a few years. So actually, I think the problem isn't that we need to be more harsh with our system. Actually, what we need to do is actually implement the legislation we already have.
Ben, that's an interesting question, actually, that Reem raises there, I think, because does this, in the case of Finlay, who we've got a photograph of on screen now for our radio listeners, absolutely beautiful, Ben, is there an argument, Ben, that actually what it would do is take the scrutiny off of these sick, twisted, again, I keep wanting to use a particular word, but these people from the social services, actually, and perhaps potential failures of the state in actually allowing this child to be placed back with these people?
Yeah, potentially. But on the other hand, if we did have the death penalty, if we had sort of the extreme in law, it would also give us more scrutiny in our justice system because you'd have a higher degree of evidence required. You'd have much more in terms of juries considering it if you had that. So I think it would balance out on, you know, on
Is there proof of that in countries where there's a death penalty currently?
I'm sure, look, there's the kind of countries which still have the death penalty.
The US?
Well, they don't. Well, the US is one example, but they of course have a very long death row. So the amount of people who actually get
and actually costs more taxpayer money to put somebody on death row in the US than it does to just send them to jail.
But on that note, though, it does cost a hell of a lot of money to bang someone up for life as well.